Hello folks, welcome to week 14 and our final lecture topic for the course, Professionalism in Surgical Technology. Your reading assignment for this week is the same as last week, pages 9 through 14 in your main textbook, the 5th edition of the Surgical Technology for the Surgical Technologist. Be sure especially to review page 14 and the description of the surgical conscience. The objectives for professional management in our curriculum are listed here on this slide. This week we're going to describe the characteristics of the professional surgical technologist. We fulfilled the remaining 2 objectives in early units, so we won't be spending time on them now. This slide lists some traits of a professional surgical technologist. In the following slides, we'll discuss each of these a bit more. Personal and professional behaviors should positively reflect the profession. The professional surgical tech will support the profession itself and engage in professional self-development. Finally, the professional surgical technologist will sometimes need to educate others about the profession. You may remember earlier in this course the term agere primo. This translates to the patient first. It is the foundation that all of our behaviors as a professional surgical tech should be built on. It is all about the patient, aseptic technique, surgical conscience, policies and procedures, safety guidelines, etc. They all orbit around the patient and patient safety. Surgical technologists need to be able to use critical thinking on a regular basis. The OR is a fluid environment and unexpected challenges are common. Being able to use critical thinking allows a surgical technologist to problem solve, sometimes before the problem even presents itself. Critical thinking starts out with identifying the problem. This is just recognizing that there is a problem. The surgical technologist must learn to anticipate problems and plan for the unexpected. What could be the unexpected problem with a certain situation? After it's been identified that there is a potential problem, it must be defined. Identifying the problem says, here's the problem. Defining it says, the problem is. Gathering information about the situation helps to provide a complete picture, which allows the identification of possible solutions. Finally, after employing the solutions, the outcomes need to be evaluated. Were these solutions adequate to solve the problem at hand? Is there something you could have done differently? Here are a few examples of times when critical thinking could play an important role in keeping the OR running smoothly and safely for our patients. First, there are 8 procedures scheduled for 7:30 the next morning. There are 8 surgical techs scheduled to work in the morning until 9, when a few more will be coming in. The next one is you have a case scheduled for the next morning, but you don't see the loaner pans for that specific case anywhere. And the third one is you have 3 total knee procedures scheduled to go at the same time the next morning, but you only have 2 big back tables which are typically used for those cases. So for each of these scenarios, the steps of critical thinking could be applied to avoid potential problems that could affect patient care or the overall flow of the department itself. So let's go through them and practice now. Our first example. There are 8 procedures scheduled for 7:30 the next morning. There are 8 surgical techs scheduled to work in the morning until 9 a.m. when a few more will be coming in. So let's identify the problem. We know that there may be staffing issue at hand here, right? Identifying the problem just says, hey, there's a potential problem here. So defining the problem is to say if someone were to call in sick, there will not be enough techs to staff the rooms in the morning. Also, there's already no extra surgical tech staff in case a procedure requires 2 scrubs or needs a runner for sterile supplies or blood products. Let's gather the information. In this situation, we'd include asking some important questions. How many cases scheduled for the morning will be needing a second scrub or a runner? Are there any extra nursing staff scheduled for the morning? If so, do any of them know how to scrub for procedures? Of the folks scheduled at 9, how many of them could potentially come in early? Is there an on-call staff that could be brought in if needed? So identifying the solutions takes all of the information gathered and deciding what should be done to help prevent a problem from developing. So once everything is said and done, evaluate the outcome so that this type of situation can be prevented or handled more efficiently in the future. In our second example, you have a case scheduled for the next morning, but you don't see the loaner pans for the case anywhere. So let's identify the problem. There may be an instrumentation problem here. Define the problem. If the loaner pan is nowhere in sight, it may not be here, may not be sterile, or it may be placed with the wrong procedure cart. If this is the case, you won't have the needed instrumentation for the next day. Let's gather information. What is the rep's phone number? Can he or she be reached? Is there record of the instruments being sterilized? If so, there should also be record of where they were sent. Identify the solutions based on the information gathered. Maybe the rep was reached and they were stuck in traffic. They will be here in an hour to deliver the loaner pans and have them sterilized for the next day. Maybe the rep brought the pans in several days ago and they've been sterilized and put aside and out of the way. Maybe they were sterilized and placed on a case cart for a similar procedure with a different surgeon. Just a simple mistake. Once the situation's been handled, evaluate the outcome to prevent the same problem from happening in the future. For our third example, you have 3 total knee procedures scheduled to go at the same time the next morning, but you only have 2 big back tables, which are typically used in those cases. Pause the video now and go through the critical thinking steps on your own. In addition to practicing critical thinking on a regular basis, the surgical technologist needs to maintain a strict surgical conscience. This is a dedication to upholding high standards of care. We often think of surgical conscience as referring to aseptic technique, but everything from cost consciousness to patient confidentiality is included. Surgical conscience is explained very well on page 14 in your text. Ethical behavior, you'll recall, is moral principles of a specific group, like the members of the AST. The AST has its own code of ethics, which you are held to as a professional surgical technologist. You can read the AST Code of Ethics on the ast.org website. Surgical technologists can support the profession by holding memberships in the Association of Surgical Technologists. The AST represents over 80,000 surgical techs. Remember from our first unit that the AST publishes standards of practice for surgical technologists with the goal of providing guidance, promoting quality surgical care, and informing the public of the care they can expect to receive from a surgical technologist. The purpose of AST, as written on their website, is to ensure quality patient care through ongoing support of the surgical technology profession. They support the profession by developing education programs and resources, as well as by keeping a close eye on any changes in healthcare. They also offer workshops and forums to members for educational purposes. So surgical techs should be participating in professional self-development. It allows a surgical tech to develop professionally over time. If a surgical tech failed to stay active in this way, their skills and knowledge would become outdated and stale. Just think about how far surgery has come in the last several years. Lasers, robotics, even laparoscopic procedures were all relatively recent advancements. Attending conferences to learn more about our profession and the developing practices in the field is a good example of professional self-development. Also, as a certified surgical tech, you will be expected to complete continuing education units in order to stay credentialed. In-services will be a common occurrence in most workplaces for surgical technologists. They should be attended and taken seriously because they will represent not only the developments in our profession, but specifically the changes that can soon be expected as part of the job at your specific facility. Education of others. There's a lot of interest from the general public about surgical technology. Many times we find ourselves explaining to a new person just what it is that we do. They may have never heard of a surgical technologist, or they may have misinterpreted that information. As you work towards entering this profession yourself, you should think about what you can do to be a good ambassador for it. A good start is to be sure that you are giving quality, factual information. It's also important to educate by example and show how a professional surgical tech holds to high standards of surgical conscience. So community service opportunities are available to the surgical tech. School career days are a great way to get involved and do something important for the kids in your area while also promoting the profession itself. As we learned about our hazard prep unit, there are options for volunteering along those lines as well. DMAT or similar teams are mobilized in the event of disaster. Finally, the community service that you choose to be involved with is your choice. There's no hard and fast rule that you have to choose opportunities based on the applicability of your profession. Just simply participating and giving back to the community is a good thing. The professional surgical technologist may find him or herself expected to act as a mentor to a newer tech or a preceptor to a surgical tech just starting out at their particular facility. It's our responsibility in this situation to be a good example of best practice, safe technique, kindness, compassion, and non-judgmental communication. You should be knowledgeable in your field and prepared to handle the situation when the unexpected happens. This goes back to the critical thinking skills discussed earlier. A real professional will be willing to and able to collaborate with their peers to facilitate or help others when they need it. For example, imagine that you recently scrubbed for a case that is relatively rare for your OR. You now have the opportunity to facilitate others when they need to scrub the same type of procedure. Keeping detailed notes will not only help you in the future, but may be used to help your peers as well. Remember that it is about the patient first. An unethical scrub tech may be tempted to keep tips and information to themselves to make themselves look better than their peers. This is a selfish and unsafe way of practicing. The surgical department should function as one big team working towards the best quality care for the patients as possible. Just remember, it is always the patient first.